Looking for the layout of a game level? Visit vgmaps.com. Stocked with hundreds, thousands of level maps for your favorite games across almost every console, vgmaps.com makes the road ahead easy to navigate. And hey, vgmaps.com was a Nintendo Quest sponsor, so we really love them and love having the site as part of the GamerCast family too. X marks the spot with vgmaps.com.
All right, this week's Icebreaker is brought to you by Mason Kramer. Check out his stream on twitch.tv/glitchcat7, aka Kramer Vision or Kramer TV. He's actually offering cat bucks for the longer that you watch. It's points that his stream automatically generate for your participation, which is kind of cool. I got a question for you guys. We'll keep it real common denominator. What's the most out-of-the-box question you guys got this week? The question you didn't see coming that someone asked you kind of out of nowhere?
Did I ever tell you how much I can't
Can I say that one?
Yeah, you can say that. What don't you like, Jay? Did you see Deadpool yet?
A question someone asked me that was like out of the ordinary.
That you didn't see coming, that was like, I did. Of all the questions you could have asked me, I would have never expected that one. What if I were to tell you right now, I just got a message on Facebook that someone said that some flea market somewhere is bootlegging Nintendo Quest. As I show you guys the picture of the bootlegged paper wrap, tissue paper things.
Should I feel honored that we're pirate worthy? I think so.
I guess. I don't know. That's.
Do you feel dirty? Like, because we're on the cover. Do you feel dirty that you're being like Xeroxed and color copied and like on like really crappy stock paper and like with a DVD with like handwritten and tender Q on it? Like, how do you feel about that?
I really don't know. It's like an awkward thing that someone threw at me that was the least thing I expected to see coming.
Speaking of things people didn't expect that relate to piracy, I'll tell you what I didn't expect to happen to me this week. We have a house guest this weekend, and for the first time in 2 years since the CRTC passed some sort of legislation about it, I got a letter from my internet provider warning me that my IP address had shown illegally downloaded media from Viacom.
Oh, yeah?
Not just that, but I got 14 of these emails.
When? What have you been dipping your toes in?
Liar.
This is not me. This is our house. Our house guest had a torrent program running on the computer in the background. Wasn't even downloading anything, but it hit on this, and we got like cease and desist letters about it. And the irony of this to me is that there are plenty of legitimate things somebody could have sent me an email about at any point over the last 2 years. Nobody has.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yeah. The ironic part about that is your ISP is only committed to telling you that they're aware, but they can't say anything else.
So that was a surprise.
Somebody walked in to my work the other day and like, "Hey, you look like that dude who's in that Nintendo movie." I was like, "Oh yeah, I am that dude." And he's like, "Oh, cool, man." He's like, "I really enjoyed it. It was a really good flick." I'm like, "Oh yeah, where'd you pick it up?" He's like, I got it." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, where'd you get it from?" Found it on the internet.
This week, sponsored by GlitchCat7, piracy.
Right.
All right, there's our icebreaker.
I didn't even get to tell you my question. That doesn't matter.
Well, go ahead, you big hero.
I thought you just did.
It's built up now too much. My wife turned to me and said, "Do you drink from the hose?" Welcome to another GamerCast. Welcome.
Yep.
What are we talking about this week?
Here we are.
Good to have you here, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
I'm one of your three hosts, Rob McCallum, joined alongside Mr. Jay Bartlett.
Hello, everyone.
And Glenn Stanway. And we're all remote this time. Glenn, say hi, though.
We are. Hi, everybody from scenic London, Ontario, Canada.
And sunny and warm Las Vegas.
I
can't believe the snow pictures I've seen from up there.
It's incredible.
I sort of feel bad. Not really. I get an update on the Nintendo Quest DVD from the flea market. It's being sold for $1. My goodness. We've made the dollar bin, boys. Yes! Woohoo! We're out there.
Yeah, cheap paper.
Yeah, you wanted this? Take this. It's a Costa. It talks about tentacles. I like it.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around going into a flea market and seeing our faces on like a bootleg copy of our movie. I don't know. Should I feel honored or should I feel like
I
ripped
don't
off?
know what to feel.
It's weird. It's a weird emotion I'm feeling right now.
I'm gonna drink from the hose and think about it. I want to remind people that the box art documentary Kickstarter is going to start up mid-April. We've got a lot of people on board. At this point, I think we have 127 and some pretty cool stuff that we're going to get to film. One of the folks that we have on board actually designed the Link to the Past Zelda font and the Game Boy packaging as well as the Virtual Boy packaging. So that's going to be cool to sit down with that gentleman who also worked on a bunch of the Final Fantasy stuff. More people like that will be announced very, very shortly. Dash Quest is doing well. Its latest update is number 1 on the Apple Store, I believe.
I don't know if it's number 1 on the Apple Store, but we made their best new games update, which is a very, very big deal for us. We've been fortunate enough to do, when the game launched back in October, they made best new games, and then since I've been there, we've made best new game updates twice, and that's a gigantic deal. Like the installs and the revenue just go through the roof every time that happens. So we're really
yeah,
pleased
and
about that.
thanks for
Really
the heads
excited.
up on that open house and offer for a beverage. I got a lot of notice on that one. Hey guys, come in, check out our studio and grab a beer. No problem. See you at the airport. Send the private jet. Apple's sponsoring you. You can afford a jet. Come on.
In the middle of a blizzard, yeah. No, I hope you can get to the studio next time you're in town, Rob. It'd be cool for you to kind of show where the magic happens.
Well, I've seen the old studio layout, which is pretty cool. But
You mean Jeff's basement?
well, I tried to make it a little more professional than that. But you know, it is what it is. Do what you got to do. Jay, what's going on with you?
I'm just sitting around.
I like
I'm loving doing podcasting with Josh Schmidt. I think out of all the dudes that we met through this whole Nintendo Quest, ride, he's definitely one of the coolest and most genuine. So we're having a blast. We're actually going through The Force Awakens now. I think we're on part 3, just talking about each scene, and we love
For Galaxy Far,
dissecting
Far
it.
Away, right?
Galaxy Far, Far Away, my friends, on Podbean and iTunes. So check us out, please. Thank you.
Speaking of which, I think we should probably tell people that very shortly we're going to be switching over to Podbean ourselves. Probably
It's a good
April
site, man.
1st, we will no longer be on Podomatic, and if you're still subscribed to us via there, you'll get a little message saying, hey, you got to re-add us on iTunes or your favorite site. All our Patreon backers don't have to worry because they'll still have the repository of our archives for all the new episodes, so that continuity will be there. But everybody else will have to switch over soon. So it's cheaper. There's more things that we can do with it, and the interface
Yeah,
itself.
no limitations on storage,
Podbean is
which has been a huge
fantastic,
deal with
man.
Podomatic. Nothing against Podomatic. I mean,
I got a few things against them. I got a few things.
So they've largely been great to us, but just the fact that we don't have to worry about storage constraints and that sort of thing is going to be really awesome. And when we have so many friends and so many other people doing stuff on the network as well, just to me it makes sense to help promote that community a bit more.
I want to remind people that Power of Grayskull Kickstarter is still going on. If you like He-Man and the Masters Universe, Star Wars, 80s toys, merchandise, cartoons, 90s, 2000s, and you like to see the story of different properties being rebooted and what it takes and what happens behind the scenes to some of the stuff you know and love, you're going to want to check this out. Go to Kickstarter.com, search Power of Grayskull. I also want to give a big shout out to Your Game Source and Insight Editions for giving me this review copy of XCOM 2 Resurrection. It's a
Snap.
It's a novel that bridges all the events between XCOM Enemy Unknown and XCOM 2, which just landed not too long ago on Steam. I'm really hoping for a console edition, but I did break it down, and I do have a Steam copy because I really want to play it. So I held off playing it just so I could read this book, and I'm glad I did. It's a welcome addition to that universe, and if you want to know my complete thoughts on it, check out yourgamesource.com. Gerald and those guys are great, and they always support us and share our links, so that's fantastic.
Can I ask you guys something before we get rolling here?
Do you drink water from the hose?
Guilty.
What have you guys been playing in the last week or two? What games have you been playing?
Oh, honestly, you want to know what I've been playing?
Yeah.
I've been playing Little Samson for
Nice.
NES.
I've been playing Dash Quest.
Oh, I appreciate that, Rob.
No, I did install the new update. I did kick that off. I haven't really sat down too much with it. I did cut the trailer for you guys, so I want to see how the new modes work. But I've really just been putting a lot of time into Trials of Cold Steel still. What are you playing, Glenn?
I'm getting into the home stretch of Witcher 3 finally. It's taken some time, but I'm getting there.
Is that with the extended DLC Season Pass Ultra Mega Super Witcher Edition?
I have not gotten any of the DLC yet, no.
So you know what? You're only a quarter of the way through. You're not a real fan. The continuity changes with the DLC. It pretends like the whole game wasn't there.
Oh, great. It's like BioShock Infinite.
Ba-doom, What are we talking about today, Glenn?
We're talking about gaming controllers. We were talking about the evolution of control in video games. This is a topic you suggested over our chat recently, Rob, and
I didn't think you'd take it seriously and make a show out of it.
Oh, no, I totally made a show out of it.
Oh.
I'm quite excited by it.
Okay.
I hope you're excited.
I can't wait.
Control.
The enthusiasm.
I'm trying to decide if this recording experience is better or worse than normal.
Back in my day, you just needed a stick and a button.
What I want to know is if you have problems with new controllers because they don't follow the same continuity as the original ones.
That's why I'm a Sony fanboy, because they hardly ever change.
That's funny.
Off comes the headset.
Real funny. You don't have to be upset because they butchered your series, buddy. Don't get mad at me.
Oh, here we go.
Get mad at me.
I'm so excited for everybody that's a Patreon follower, because the stuff we're talking about now is going to pertain to what comes later, because we did a little cart before the horse. Usually we record the show and then Patreon. This time we just had like a 40-minute chat about continuity and pop culture universes.
Our original icebreaker kind of went off the rails, but we decided to roll with it. So, guys, this is maybe a fairly obvious question, but I want to get your thoughts on it. What are the things that make a controller or an input device so important when it comes to playing games? Why is it such a big deal, what you have in your hands?
Well, comfort I think is huge. You're going to be playing games for God knows how long, which is really crazy because if you think about the NES controller, that sucker's not so comfortable with those edges over here. You know what I'm saying, Paulie? They hurt me after a while.
Yep, I agree. The ergonomics is important.
Comfort totally.
I think ultimately it's not necessarily the hardware, but in which how the software works with the hardware. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that jumping ahead in the outline?
Why don't you explain a little more?
Well, the controller you have in your hand is one thing, but the way in which the game responds to how the controls have been mapped is another thing. You can take a super comfy controller like any of our current gen stuff. The Xbox 360 controller is pretty famous. The Wii U Pro controller is nice and comfy. The PlayStation controllers in general, since they're all very similar, are nice and easy to hold for long periods of time. But if the games aren't programmed for ease of control, then you feel like you're fighting that device in your hand, and there's a disconnect between the communication between you and the game.
Would it be fair to say, Rob, that you're hinting at immersion as well? Like, is your ability to immerse yourself in the game that you're playing down to how you're interacting with it?
I don't know if that'd be fair to say, but I'll give it to you.
Is that something that's a consideration, do you think?
Yeah. Yes.
Jay, what about you? Have you ever had an experience with bad controls which has actually pulled you out of a game or kept you from being able to play it or enjoy it?
I was just going to talk about, I wanted to bring up some of our favorite controllers. I'm sure you have that in the outline, but one controller that I could never get comfortable with was the GameCube one. I always found that one was always very, very confusing for me. And ultimately I just didn't like it. Yeah, so trying to play, I think it was, what was the last Zelda? The Twilight Princess for the GameCube.
Which is interesting, right? Because they've now since reissued the GameCube controllers so that everybody on Smash Brothers can play with that.
But that was the Smash Brothers on GameCube is arguably the go-to one. That's the one everyone wants to play, right? I mean, so they brought the GameCube controller so everyone who mastered that can be, familiar with it and stuff. But just for me, it was just the C stick and those weird controls and the Z button and the D-pad is brutal on the GameCube, man. Try playing a fighting game on that. Forget it.
I was going to get that to a little later, but since we're talking about it already, what are your three least favorite controllers, Jay?
CDI, Atari Jaguar, and the GameCube.
Okay, why for the Jaguar and the CD?
The Jaguar borrowed heavily from the ColecoVision, which was it looked like a phone, like the old school phones we used to have in our houses, or the ones you currently have. Cell phones, I don't know. It was just like a dial pad. You would put the overlay on top of the controller, and it was really clunky and clumsy.
I didn't mind it because I thought it worked great for games like Doom or Alien vs Predator, where you could choose all your different weapons instead of cycling through them.
Yeah.
So again, this comes down to a little bit great for that game, but for the whole library, maybe not.
I just thought for me, it was just dated technology, and I get what they were trying to do. I mean, it was great back for the Coleco, but trying to bring it back in 1994, I don't think was such a great idea. The CDI, I mean, I don't even have to tell you why. It's absolutely brutal. It's the most non-responsive controller you can ever hold, and it's brutal on your hands. It's the hardest plastic on earth.
What are your 3 least favorite, Rob?
I really don't like the Wii U gamepad.
Oh, good one.
It feels like I'm holding a digital cinder block from time to time.
Why? Because you're holding like this?
I got some broad shoulders, and I gotta tell you, holding that gamepad, it's like wider than my shoulders. You know what I mean? I don't feel like I've got great control over what's going on. I feel like I'm playing like a leapster or a leapfrog with that thing. It's just massive. Feel like I'm holding a cafeteria tray with that. I mean, it's cool that I can look down and see the screen, except for when I have to look down at the screen and at the TV at the same time, which is why Star Fox was delayed again. And, you've got to then gyro controls that aren't great. It's not so good. Conversely, the Dreamcast controller, it's okay, but I feel really narrow with it because of the way it asks you to hold your hands. To have your hands in instead of out, like some other controllers. So your wrists are actually kind of pointed towards each other.
The problem I have with that one too is don't you find that the GameCube controller is very hard on your hands?
I like the GameCube controller because I like the shoulder triggers.
No, sorry, I meant the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast controller, like the D-pad. I remember trying to play Street Fighter versus
it's sharp.
Whatever.
It's sharp.
Brutal.
And I don't know. I like the NES Max because it's like the first boomerang kind of controller, even though the D-pad was kind of useless on it. The fat Genesis controller is okay, but the 6-button is so much better. I don't know. As a third one, I'd probably honestly say the Wiimote. It's great for Wii Sports and other titles like that, but to use that skinny little wand on the side, which mimics the NES pad, is just like, ugh.
Man, try and play, and I know a lot of people have, obviously, but Twilight Princess when you're holding the nunchuck and the remote like this.
Oh yeah, and like the batteries kill that for me too. I'm constantly switching AA's. There's no USB plug-in to charge. There's no cradle for it.
To me, the fact that the nunchuck was even a thing speaks to the shortcomings of the design of
that feels like a Steve Jobs type thing, right? Like if you need the stylus, you've done it wrong when describing an iPad.
A little bit. My 3 least favorite. There may be a little bit of controversy here. I am not a fan of the Genesis controller.
The 6-button or the 3-button?
The fat 6-button Genesis controller. Can't stand it.
Okay.
Frankly, either one of them. I feel like the D-pads are flaky on them. They always just felt cheap in my hands. They always just felt kind of flimsy. And I've had issues with buttons on a lot of them too.
You can share your opinion here. It's a safe zone, but we don't have to agree with it.
I'm not a fan of the original Xbox Duke controller.
Oh, the big one?
Because it was the size of my house.
Sure. Yeah.
I agree.
And weighed about as much too. And the other one, and this is going to be the controversial one, I think. I cannot stand the DualShock. I can't stand it.
I'm with you there, buddy. I never liked any of the PlayStation controllers to be honest.
I feel like they've gotten better, but I mean, we'll say the original DualShock for the sake of argument. But I mean, I've never found those things comfortable. Yeah. I hate the D-pads. I hate the fact that the analog sticks are stuck in the middle of the controller. I've just never been a fan. I don't find the trigger or the shoulder buttons comfortable.
I don't like the PS4 one. I like the PS3 one, but there was a curve for me to get used to it because I never had the PS1 or PS2, so PS3 was my first entry to that.
Same.
The PS4 is definitely my favorite iteration of it, but I'm not a fan of the earlier ones as a general rule.
My favorite are the bootleg N64 controllers.
Yeah, I bet they are the gold one.
I have a sweet gold one.
Well, like the Mad Cats ones.
Oh, I wish it was Mad
Oh, not
Catz.
even. It's like Intertech or Intech or something like that.
Intertech. Yes, we're gonna kickstart a company called Intertech to make third-party controllers.
And you brought it. You bought it because we were into GoldenEye, which is amazing. But oh yeah, I have the gold controller.
No, I got it with Ocarina.
Oh, they gave you a bootleg.
Well, EB and their awesome bundles for launch. How can you say no to
Oh
those?
yeah, bundle time. What's the earliest control method you can recall for a video game that you played?
My mouth to tell Jay what to do since he wouldn't let me play any of the games.
Good answer. Good answer.
Good answer.
Um,
Let's see if that's on the board.
a paddle
Show me.
for a game called Kaboom for the 2600, and so they were called a paddle. It was like the dial, similar to the Pong dials, but yeah, that's mine for sure. Remember that playing at my Aunt Bev and my Uncle Don's house. The first time I ever played games was in that basement. So
I would say it's probably either traditional arcade setup with a joystick and a couple of buttons, or possibly even a keyboard. Honestly, we had a Commodore 64 and a VIC 20, and those were the first kind of game playing machines in our house. So initially you used the keyboard. We got a joystick eventually, but the keyboard was our primary way of playing them for a really, really long time.
I think
which was
after
which
that,
was the one with the sorry, which was the one with the tape that played the tapes?
I think both of them
Did
did.
they?
The Commodore did for sure. There was like a cassette
I
tape
just,
drive. Yeah.
I see. I was never like a PC gamer, so I never had any of the old like the Amigas. I remember the Amiga back in the day was like if you had that, you were
remember how deep the
pretty
buttons
cool.
were and how thick that keyboard was? Keyboard was like
It was
4
huge.
inches deep.
Yeah.
You'd push a button
Seriously,
and be
yeah.
be like reaching into the stereo box to try to find the prize. That's how deep those wedges were. I tell you. I think honestly, after Jay allegedly says he let me use his Atari controller, he didn't.
I totally did.
It was probably the light zapper, even before the NES D-pad, and then probably like a keyboard and mouse for like King's Quest 4 specifically.
How do you feel that those early control methods influenced the kind of games that we saw on those consoles and on those systems?
I think you look at something like the joystick for Atari, and you basically had a lot of single screen games where the cursor would start in the middle and that joystick would represent the entire universe around it. So there was a 360 kind of controller that you could point in any direction and therefore go any direction within that single screen. I think with the D-pad, which I think started with the Game & Watch, and then it was later transferred to the Famicom,
You are correct, sir.
it almost felt like it wanted you to push a different direction versus giving you the option. So the controller almost indicated what to do with the D-pad.
On the subject of the D-pad, Jay, tell me about your first experience with the classic NES controller.
My friend Darren got a Nintendo long before I ever did, and he had a sleepover. It was his birthday, and so there was a bunch of us, and stayed up all night and played Super Mario Brothers, and just grabbing this controller. And I mean, I had a 2600, so that to me was a video game controller, and the arcade. Those were controllers, but this weird sideways thing with 2 buttons, I guess 4 total, but yeah, Super Mario Brothers, and just remembering. It was just very confusing for us at the beginning because you're used to, a stick with 1 button.
Same question for me, Glenn?
Sure, Rob. What was your first experience with an NES controller?
I wasn't at Jay's house because he wouldn't let me play it. Actually, no, he did. I remember playing specifically Contra with Jay and taking all his lives.
I put the code in, used all of them.
Oh, but you wouldn't let me have the spread weapon, so I think it worked out. You made me use fire, and you took the spread.
No, I made you use laser.
Either way, Jay's game room, Jay's rules.
No, because the laser, you were the power. I took care of everything, and you took care of like the
death count.
You killed our men.
Oh, Muffin. And then basically after the first stage, it was only Jay playing.
How much of an impact do you think that controller had on the success of the NES?
Changed everything. It changed everything after, because everything has a D-pad now. And even though we're kind of back to the joystick-ish with our analog sticks, and that seems to be probably the standard now, I would say. I think it's pretty fair to say. I mean, some games give you both options. The D-pad from Game & Watch, I think it was, 82 or 81, something like that, all the way through Up until essentially the GameCube killed the D-pad with its micro thumbnail-sized version of it. We had like 20 years of D-pad controlled games.
Yeah, it completely changed everything.
So here's something I do want to pick your brain about then, Jay. So you're obviously an NES expert. We saw a whole film about it.
He's a nexpert.
I tried to make a list of different controllers for the NES. So among the things that I've got in here, we've got Rob, we have the Power Glove, we have the NES Advantage, we have the NES Max. I guess the Power Pad would count as a controller as well, probably.
Yeah.
Light Zapper. What are the good and bad aspects of all of those control methods?
Well, I mean, I really was a big fan of the NES Advantage because that brought you back to the arcade style. So if you wanted to play that old school Atari way, I mean, try playing an Advantage, using your Advantage with Super Mario Brothers. It's really pretty cool. One downside I could think of right off the bat was from the Max, and how now, cool, if I'm wrong, tell me, but I think it was the first controller that had the turbo buttons, and I really think that was a mistake because it made a lot of gamers lazy, especially for stuff like Contra, where you're constantly just spamming the shoot button, right? Power
I
pad.
can't remember what came first, the Advantage or the Max. They both had turbo
Max did.
options.
Max
They both did, yeah. And those are two of the only examples I can think of first-party controllers that did that, too. Most of the time when you see that kind of feature on a controller, it's third-party.
Yeah. I love my third-party Advantage clone. I think it's called the Quick Shot. It's like a dark brownish, maybe hint of green. It has a big giant red ball on it. It's kind of rounded edges.
I used to love playing with the Advantage. It had a big metal base on the bottom. So you really had to have kind of a table. And I remember I used to have like this almost like TV tray that I would stick on either side of my chair. And so it really felt like the arcade. And I remember when I was in a serious game mode and I really wanted to get into a game, I would use the Advantage. And it made me feel closer to the game.
I was certainly not allowed to ever touch his Advantage when he was in serious game mode.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, I had a friend who swore by his Advantage, like it's all he ever used. He insisted on using it. Sell me on something, like what's the benefit of having Rob or the Power Glove? Like what's the benefit of it as a control method?
With the Power Glove back in the day, and don't laugh, but it was just if you had that, you were the man. You were Lucas. You were the cool guy, and that was the only positive thing to that peripheral. I mean, it's absolutely broken. Rob and I tried to use it, and it was, I mean, your hand cramps. You're doing this and twisting and turning, playing Rad Racer and trying to jump in Mario. Forget about it, man. Like,
I mean, by comparison, when it comes to like other control methods for the NES, the Power Pad was light years ahead in terms of functionality compared to the Power Glove.
And something like stadium events, world class track meet, it plays so well. Like I can't believe how well and responsive the Power Pad is. The only drawback is, of course, it's just for that game, or for a handful of those workout games. But yeah.
So with all those different control options out there, why do you feel like the original NES controller has had this lasting impact and this legacy that we still see today, even with all those other options that were available in the system?
Durability,
simplicity.
Yeah,
it's just a
elegance.
Like
it is.
It's two buttons in a direction.
It's such a solid built controller. I have, from my very first NES, I still have my controllers with my Link sticker on the back. They still work today.
That's a controller that I wouldn't necessarily say was built to play Super Mario Brothers, but I mean, it became married to that game, right? Like those two games go together like peanut butter and jelly. It's still weird to play Super Mario Brothers with something that isn't an NES controller.
Yeah.
And I think that controller and that game on that system at that time together, just pushed everything to another level.
You had a brand new control style, a brand new style of game that were both brilliant. And yeah, it was like lightning in a bottle, baby.
When we get into the 16-bit era, and you've touched on this a little bit with TurboGrafx 16 already, Jay, we did see some different takes on that base concept, right? With things like the SNES, things like the Genesis. Who do you think did it best and why?
Super Nintendo.
Genesis 6 button.
Well, I agree with you, Jay, but what's your argument for it?
The two convex, the two concave buttons. So as the games became more complex, like Final Fantasy, you you were adding more buttons, but it wasn't confusing because you could feel it where you were with your thumb, the convex and the concave. It was solid like the NES controller, and it just felt right. I do like the Genesis 6 button, Rob. I do, and I kind of agree with you, Glenn, with the croissant style original Genesis controller was a little bit clunky and it was very hollow. It felt very hollow when you were pressing the buttons.
I just really like the six button because it seemed to allow you to do a little bit more. It allowed for more flexibility, especially in games that came out midway through the Genesis run and everything after. And it's obviously the precursor to the Saturn controller, Saturn six button, which is really nice. The difference was between the two, the SNES launched with that controller, and like Nintendo usually does, they never really deviate from that plan. Whereas Sega was trying to capitalize and say, "Oh, great, they have six buttons. Now we need to have six buttons."
Well,
Because they
they
just had
actually
the three, right? So
they made that for Street Fighter. That
right,
was the initial reason why they designed it.
I was going to say the one instance where it really does make sense for me are fighting
Yeah.
games. I think the six face buttons make a lot of sense for that, and that's why you see that on a lot of arcade stick setups.
Yeah.
even to
well,
this
and then
day.
that's my next thing, right? Like, so it appealed to the Street Fighter crowd, but they ultimately came out with the Fight Stick, which is better for the fighting games. The Sega
Yeah.
Fight Stick with the six buttons on that.
Yeah.
That's a great first party fight stick. And Jay, and as you and I discovered, even though I thought there was a super advantage, it's not a first party super advantage.
It's not, no, yeah.
Yeah, so they never had an arcade stick for the SNES that was first party.
I've never really been too like particular on controllers. I've always usually stayed to the one that comes packed in with the console, and the reason for that was, back in the days when we were going to everyone's house and playing, I didn't want to have my super stick that I used in my room and then go to my buddy's house and he doesn't have that, and then all of a sudden I'm not as good at Tyson's Punch-Out as I would be at my house because I don't have the same controller. So I generally, for the most part, would stay to the factory default controller.
Do you remember that though? The actual having controllers and the whole idea of we need our own controllers really hit home when it came to GoldenEye and N64.
Oh,
We would rent controllers.
Yeah.
Man. We'd go to
And-
Blockbuster and rent a controller for a week.
So on the subject of 3D gaming and the 3D gaming era, talk about the significance of the analog stick to the current gaming environment. We kind of started out with joysticks and then we almost moved back into them again with the creation of the analog stick. What's the significance there?
Super Mario 64. I mean, that have Mario in a 3D world, and so much depended on. It wasn't just pressing it and moving. It was degrees of pressure that you would need to achieve the different jumps and the different heights. That could only be done through something like that. And I remember the first time Rob and I played Mario 64, I had the Japanese import. And we were just fascinated by the fact that you would just put a little bit of pressure and Mario would like sneak. And then you put more pressure and he would start to run. Like, it was just absolutely mind blowing at the time.
I think it goes back a little bit to what I said about the Atari kind of setup with that joystick, where you're in the center of the world and you have all the options around you. So now it's a different camera angle. It's almost, instead of a top-down view where you see everything in two dimensions and you can go anyway, now we're like a third-person perspective or even first-person perspective. We can scan the Z-axis or the Z-axis. That's a whole nother dimension that we can explore. And the only way to do that is to cater a camera angle towards that. And I think the analog did the best representation of blending the vertical and the horizontal plus the depth.
You guys were talking about GoldenEye a few minutes ago, and how when you play GoldenEye, you had to go out and rent controllers because it was really, really important that each of you have your own controller. I remember those games too, where you'd have two Nintendo N64 controllers and like two knockoff ones, and you'd have to fight over who got the knockoff ones because nobody wanted to use them. Or you'd have that one that had a crummy analog stick on it, and some poor bastard would have to use it.
Can I stop you there for a second and throw one other thing at you that I think is important to note? N64, I think, was the first Nintendo system that only came with one controller as well. By the time I got my NES, it had two controllers, super packed in two controllers. So this was the first time Nintendo only launched with one controller. So
Isn't that interesting as well? because
They had
there's
four,
four controller ports for that system. Yeah.
So unless you had an N64, and clearly we didn't because we were renting it, you didn't have a controller to bring over. And even then, they would all have been the same color. So when we'd rent stuff, they'd usually be different colors. And when we bought them, they were different colors too, just to make that easier.
GoldenEye is arguably the first-person shooter to actually feel at home on a game console and actually be really, really successful on a home game console. What do you think the N64 controller had to do with that? Like, why did the N64 controller make that work, whereas something else might not have?
I think it's really the analog stick. Again, being able to look in all directions and being able to invert the analog controls, knowing that some people want to play this way, other people want to play that way. The shoulder buttons, too, being able to aim, I thought was a kind of nice touch.
I really think that the way that the C buttons were laid out on the N64 controller really mirrored the way that you would use the, WASD keys on a keyboard.
Well, it's like a second D-pad, right?
It was very much the same way. So strafing around corners and GoldenEye and Perfect Dark was just like second nature. It was so well done. That controller is just so well done.
But it's also really complex, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You have the D-pad, which is like 4 buttons. You have the 4 C buttons. You have the analog. You have the 2 shoulders, and you have the trigger. I think the trigger's a huge kind of feature for GoldenEye as well. That you're not hitting an A button; you're actually hitting a trigger.
But you remember the D-pad on the N64 controllers was nice and soft. It wasn't that hard, jagged plastic that the GameCube one was.
It's funny you mention that because a lot of people mod their 64 controllers to use the C-stick for fight tournaments that allow mod controllers because
cool.
it's more responsive. It is thicker. It's more direct. It's more dynamic. I think John Pompa posted a picture of his C-stick that he imported not too long ago.
What's your preferred GoldenEye control method?
Inverted for sure, 100%. Red controller, top right screen.
Yeah, I mean,
RC90.
GoldenEye was, I mean, at least in our group, we had our own identities, so we had our own characters, and we also had our own colored controllers that we used. So, I mean, it was something special. I mean, you don't really see that as often nowadays. But,
what do you mean by control method specifically, Glenn?
Well, because they had different methods of control in the game, right? Like they had different control setups.
I was always the up is up, down is down guy. So I mean, to this day, I still don't know if that's inverted or not. I can't remember, but
you're normal.
My favorite one, and I couldn't do this when we were playing multiplayer, but they had a control option there where when you were playing single player GoldenEye, you could actually use 2 separate N64 controllers, one in each hand. You used one analog stick to look, one analog stick to move. One trigger brought up the crosshairs, the other one shot.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, man. And that was absolutely my favorite control method, dual analog.
You must have looked like a hipster. It felt
kind of goofy because you
I was going to say, you must have looked like quite the hipster, cross-legged on the floor, holding 2 N64 spaceships in your hand.
That's cool, man. I didn't know that. That's cool.
True, man. Yeah, it was honestly my favorite way to play the game. Just you had the dual analog. You didn't have to sacrifice analog on either looking or aiming.
So I wonder if that transferred over to Perfect Dark when you could add double weapons and double triggers.
I'm fairly confident it's in there. You guys,
Glenn?
I would have thought you guys would have known better than I would.
Let's figure that out.
Yeah, we'll have to check that out for sure.
That's not.
So I want you to go play Perfect Dark later today.
I can do that.
See if you can figure out if that control method's in there. I've heard it said in the past, we talked about Super Mario Brothers and the N64 controller kind of being linked together. Or, sorry, the original NES controller, I mean. I've heard it said in the past that the evolution of the Mario game series has pushed Nintendo's controller design. I don't know if you guys have heard that before or heard that theory before. But it's like every Mario game pushes the design of what the controller needs to be. And it's almost like the controllers are built around playing that game. I think the argument could be made that the N64 controller was built for Super Mario 64.
Oh, yeah. I can see that for sure.
Do you guys think that's true? Like, do you think that's actually a thing?
I think the argument maybe ends at Mario 64 then, because I don't think the GameCube controller was really built, for Galaxy, and Sunshine.
Well, the GameCube one for Sunshine more to the C stick would be to navigate that camera, because the clunky camera of the 64 one was refined in Sunshine, and the C stick was designed perfectly to rotate that. So I would definitely say that it evolved with the games, with the Mario games, yeah, for sure.
And I
And
also
then Galaxy with the the Wiimote and the nunchuck for sure.
yeah, but again, it's just a Wiimote and a nunchuck. It's just an analog stick. You could have used a 64 controller on that. In fact, you can use your
You could have,
GameCube controller.
but you needed to point the remote at the screen to shoot the stars and all that.
I certainly don't think the Wii U gamepad pushed 3D World any different than the N64 controller.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really play that one too much.
You're missing out, man. It's one of my favorite Mario games, and I know you don't like it, but you can be wrong.
I'm wrong.
Well, we brought up the Wii and the Wii U, so let me ask the question. Was motion control a fad? And is it over?
Yes. Oh, yes. 100%. 100% a fad. 100% over.
Rob?
Yes.
Not over. Maybe fad, but certainly not over. I'm sure you're going to see more of that when it comes to VR. I think VR arguably is just an extension of motion control because you have to move your head around and look around, and it's on you. You're not gaming, I would say, in the traditional sense where you're sitting down with a controller in your hand. Is VR going to be a fad? Maybe.
Look at the failure of like the Kinect on the Xbox One and the PS4 camera. Complete bombs.
I definitely want to talk about VR as well, but I just want to ask about motion controls a little bit first. Like, what were the good and the bad things that came out of that period where motion control was just this huge thing with the Wii and PlayStation Move and Kinect and all of that stuff?
Well, simplicity, right?
Nobody did it as good as Nintendo. Nobody ever does it as good as Nintendo.
Nobody does it better.
Yeah, I would say the good stuff, that came out of Wii Sports. I mean, we played bowling, me, Rob, and Ferg in my basement for I can't even tell you how long, constantly. That worked well, and it was amazing. Now, flip that around. The bad was that when I popped in Twilight Princess, I couldn't play with my controller in a traditional Zelda sense, and I didn't want to be waggling my hand around to swing Link's sword every time I had to fight. So that was the downside. But I loved it for stuff like Tiger Woods and for Wii Sports, but I wanted the option to switch between the two.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird to base your whole system around one concept because it never, especially such a different concept. Now, obviously, they captured so many people that weren't gamers with it. They captured maybe the casual audience that may have been intimidated by controllers with 16 buttons or 25 buttons or button combinations. It was like the NES controller, right? We talked about how when you flip the Wii mode on its side, it is the NES controller. It's just simple. It's a D-pad and two buttons, or even more simple than that. It's just, the trigger and moving the wand around, the actual control. It is so easy for people to pick up and play. But the downside of that is, for the people that want to play something more in depth, the system limits that depth. If ever there was a companion system to the traditional way of gaming, in hindsight, it seems to be the Wii.
I wanted to talk about PC gaming a little bit. What do you think is the significance of the fact that the control method for PC games has basically not changed in decades?
Well, it has, though, right?
Has it?
Because in the last 10 years, excuse my ignorance, all the PC gamers out there, and that would, I guess, include you, Stanway, because I know you play a little bit of Steam stuff. They've adopted like 360 controllers, so you can actually use a standard, I'm using the term loosely, gaming controller instead of keyboard and mouse. Though some people really prefer to use the keyboard and mouse input.
Yeah, you have the option, but the keyboard and mouse is still your basic means.
But that's the problem, because that's what throws me off. I remember trying to play NHL 94 with a keyboard and mouse. So uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think some games it works and some it doesn't.
Yeah, platformers are definitely very hard to play with a keyboard and mouse.
But
This
something
is still,
for example.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like the argument today is that, if somehow in some way you could play Xbox One, PS4, and PC Call of Duty together versus each other, the guy with the mouse and keyboard will destroy you all. I mean, that's just there's an accuracy to that control method that can't be matched with a controller.
I'm excited to play XCOM because I'll be using a keyboard and mouse to play a game for the first time since World of Warcraft in 2004.
My buddy Zach Dolan, Jay, who I believe you know, actually uses a keyboard and mouse to play Destiny.
What?
He has it's some sort of adapter. I can't remember what it's called, but it allows you to use a mouse and keyboard setup with the Xbox One.
No way. Crazy.
And he actually plays Destiny with the mouse and keyboard because he just can't use a controller.
Speaking of other friends,
Wow.
while we
That's-
contemplate that awesome thing, let's give a big shout out to all our Patreon backers. I feel like we haven't done that for a while. We don't have to name names because we know that there's some internet privacy stuff out there. But I want to say thank you to everybody who's continued to support us and allow the Power Tour to exist and all that stuff. You guys have any thoughts on our backers?
Yeah, I want to say thank you as well, Rob. You guys are completely awesome, and I'm glad that we can entertain you from week to week. And yeah, I just really appreciate it. Thank you.
It's truly humbling that there are so many people who are big enough fans of what we do or hearing us do it that they would continue to pledge money every month to kind of help us continue to do this stuff we do every week and continue supporting our projects. And it's just it really is humbling. That's the best word I can come up with it. But you guys are the best, and it really means a lot to all of us that we mean so much to you guys.
And I apologize. I know it's a little out of left field, a little off topic, but I feel like you can never say thank you enough. So,
Oh, I agree. Absolutely.
cheers.
We touched a bit on this already when we were talking about the PC, but are there game genres that are just not cut out for traditional game controllers?
Yeah, I think Rob's XCOM is a really tough one to do on a controller. For the most part, at least. I think RTSs usually don't translate that well on a controller.
I think RTS is a great example, Jay. Thankfully, XCOM was turn-based. And I was
Yeah.
super concerned, man, when Fire Access and 2K Games brought out Enemy Unknown. Like, how is this going to translate to a modern controller that was
Yeah.
so point and click? Even you remember playing it on PlayStation?
Yeah, I got the PlayStation 1
Mouse.
mouse
Yeah.
specifically for XCOM. And yeah.
So they did a great job. It's fantastic, Jay. I know you still haven't played it, I don't think, but
No.
it's amazing, man. I mean,
There's bad stuff I could think of, Glenn, like StarCraft on N64 is a perfect example of
Yeah.
just, a traditional controller not working with the style of game.
I've certainly played some games that were built for a mouse and keyboard that actually work very well with the controller. And when I'm thinking of this, I'm thinking of Diablo 3.
Oh yeah,
The console
Blizzard
port of
did a
Diablo
good
3 actually
job.
plays incredibly well with a game controller. I would actually go so far as to say I prefer it. But there are other things like RTSs are a big one. I think of MMOs.
can
I
you
think
go in depth on that? Sorry, Glenn, because one of my concerns about picking up Diablo 3 was that this was something that was developed for a PC environment, and now it's being ported to like the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, and I'm worried that I won't have enough control over switching between all my actions. And again, I'm thinking more in like in a Warcraft mindset, right? Like you got the tiles on the bottom, you've got to be able to set different actions off as they go over different durations.
Yeah, everything's basically hotkeyed to a controller button, but it works.
Or a combo.
Yeah, it works very, 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 very well. And I was as surprised as anybody because I mean I remember the ill-fated PlayStation port of the original Diablo, but Diablo 3 plays extraordinarily well on a modern game controller, and I think they did an outstanding job of porting it.
I think some of the JRPGs that are coming out are getting to the point where keyboard and mouse are going to be easier to play. There are so many. Like take the Tales series for example, right? It's a turn-based active combat where you have to. It's all turn-based. Like you know when your guy's going to basically come up next to fight, but you have to like do button combos on the time. So you've got to click the attack button, or you got to click the spell button, or you basically have to set up how that works. And there are hotkeys again, but then some of your attacks are tethered to other partners, and then some of the way that those work, and some of the actions that aren't necessarily just attack or a spell, like healing or meditating or using items and stuff like that. There's potentially a lot going on, especially when you have a 4 or 6 member party, and you want to control all the people instead of letting AI take over.
I would love to see an MMO that was built from the ground up with a controller and with voice chat in mind.
Isn't that like Destiny?
It's not really
Eh,
it's not an MMO in the truest sense. I'm thinking of something like World of Warcraft in its current state would be unplayable with a controller. It just
No, I don't think so. The way they simplified WoW, I think the
it's just the
problem.
communication aspect of it that I think that would be the issue, right? Like, I
Yeah,
remember playing
that's true.
Final
Yeah,
Fantasy 11 on the PS2, and you had to have a mouse and keyboard for that.
yeah,
It was just completely impractical to try and play it without one.
yeah. Imagine WoW on the Xbox One or the PS4. You'd have like a 25-man raid, and then have your headset, and imagine 25 people like trying to talk over each other. It'd be insane, man.
but isn't the talking the same way that it would work on the PC? You'd have like 25 people. How does that work?
Well, you have text chat. I know a lot of groups or guilds will use things like it was Ventrilo at the time. I'm sure there's other voice chat programs out there now because that was years ago.
So you're using a third-party kind of chat.
Like a voice over IP kind of
God,
thing. Yeah.
we did that with DC Universe Online. We had to Skype together because
Yeah,
Sony's
we
network
did.
was so
We did Skype.
broken.
We were doing Skype on WoW too, up until a couple of years back. Yeah.
We should get back into DC Online.
One last question I wanted to ask you guys. We touched on VR a little bit earlier. So I want to know what you guys think VR is going to do in terms of the way how is it going to change the way that we interact with our games? What do you think is the next evolution of how we're going to interact with our games as far as control goes?
It's so hard to say because I really don't know what people plan to do with it. I would love to just see VR be like a different kind of chat room where you can kind of, meet your friends and do that kind of things, which is why I think, Facebook bought Oculus Rift, right? So they can apply the social stuff to it. As far as like gaming specifically, I like Jay said on a few episodes ago, I like having that separation, but that constant connection.
Yeah.
Like, don't make my world disappear around me because I don't want it to disappear. I want to be drawn into something. I don't need to be showered by it and blanketed in it. It's cool, but I really, if I was to make a guess now, and I'm sure you guys could easily agree, is that it could be very much a fad.
Well, I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it become something like the holodeck in Star Trek, where I mean, that's you go there to do that thing, and you meet a bunch of players, and you guys like play something or recreate something. But the new Street Fighter that comes out, the new Call of Duty, whatever, I don't want to be forced to play it in a VR setting.
I don't want it to be where I've got to kick and punch in order to make my character kick and punch.
I mean,
Now,
I think VR games can be great role-playing experiences and stuff like that. I think that I'm all for that. I think that'd be really cool because you go there to do that thing. But if I want to play the newest Zelda in a traditional sense, I should be able to do that.
And I'm not going to do VR gaming if I'm just looking at a theater of a big screen of a game that I'm controlling with a controller anyways. I'd rather just watch it on my TV screen.
Yeah.
So it's all the things that are around the game world that really excite me. Like, I'd love to do GamerCast via VR. And there's apps that would allow us to do that quite easily already via Samsung from our good friend Todd Curtis. Him and I were back and forth on it. So there's some possibilities there for sure. That's what I find exciting. The way in which, again, this technology can enhance what is currently going on in the game world.
Cool, guys. That's really all I had question-wise. Do you have anything else you wanted to say on the subject before we sign off?
I think the simplest thing is you don't have to constantly reinvent the wheel and dedicate an entire console to what you think might be a good idea when it already works.
Yeah.
It already works. Just don't change it when things work so well. Give us the options to let us choose, and I think that's what you're going to see. And you're already seeing it in the entertainment world, right? With the deconstruction of cable packages and satellite stuff, where it's becoming a user-based choice, where we get to decide how we want to view things. Let us decide how we want to play. So the fact that you said Zach gets to use a keyboard and a mouse because that's the way he wants to play Destiny is great. That freedom is fantastic from a user point of view. I love it.
Yeah. I'm with you there. I just think options are totally necessary, and like I said, the controller should feel. Actually, the controller shouldn't feel like anything. It should be just an extension of yourself. You shouldn't be aware of the controller. And I think modern gaming, especially with stuff like the Wii U, Rob, like you said with Mario World, where you have to blow in this and turn it upside down for that, I just think it pulls you right out of the experience, and it's quite annoying. So I think you should be allowed to play the games traditionally, or enhance them if you want with the different controls.
It's ultimately at this point, what, almost 50 years into gaming, where you notice when it's not working more than you notice when it is working. Like you'll probably have that brief moment, it's like, oh, this is really kind of organic and fluid. But more than not, you'll find yourself saying, oh man, the controls are horrible, or I'm fighting with them. And a good game will always come down to great controls over visuals any day of the week.
Yeah. And for me personally, it's a shame where like a masterpiece like Twilight Princess won't be touched on the Wii because I do not like the controls, and that
Will you
really,
play it
really
on the Wii U?
sucks. If they allow me to do traditional, absolutely.
I think.
Oh, it'll be traditional for sure. Yeah.
That gives me something great to say that we can maybe close the show on, depending on how Glenn you want to wrap it up, and we'll segue to Patreon and all that stuff. Jay, there is a really good chance that the NX could launch with a Zelda title. How concerned are you about a weird kind of controller setup scheme, much like we got with the Wii coming in and bridging the GameCube era?
I personally feel very comfortable with what Nintendo is about to do because I think it's no secret that the Wii U is probably one of their most unsuccessful consoles. And I feel confident they're going to go back to that traditional sense. Now, even if the controller itself has a touch screen, I'm okay with that, as long as they just allow us to, like I said, play in the traditional sense. So
We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and Jay seemed kind of nonplussed by the Twilight Princess HD remake, but I'm actually really excited for it. I think if it's anywhere near as good as the Wind Waker HD remake they did, it'll be really well worth playing, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to revisit Twilight Princess with more traditional control, because I did play through it on the Wii initially. That was my first and only experience with it, and I found going back to play it again several years later was very, very difficult to do.
And I will say, to be fair, they did release it on the GameCube. I believe it was the last game released on the GameCube.
Yeah,
but they did that weird mirror thing, which really messed with me. The game was mirrored.
You see, they're paying tribute to that in Twilight Princess HD, eh?
Are they?
They're going to have the standard mode of the game, but they have a hero mode, kind of like they did in Wind Waker, where you take extra damage and you don't get hearts from cutting grass and that kind of stuff. But it's going to use the mirrored map. So you're still going to have you're still going to have both versions in one game, which I think is actually really cool.
That is
that's a neat
cool.
play on it.
Yeah, I think that's very cool.
It makes it canon. It ties it all in like it existed. It doesn't ignore that release. And
There we go.
I think we've got some thoughts on that. So let's segue to Patreon land. For everybody that is a Patreon subscriber, you will hear an awesome Mario Warpipe sound effect. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. Everybody else will see at the end of the show. Remember, just for $1, you too can be part of all the fun that happens on Patreon. And I guarantee you, since we recorded it before we recorded the chunk of this show, you don't want to miss out. Patreon.com/GamerCast. Everybody else out there, thanks for listening on this discussion on everything control from across all eras, all genres. Just a reminder, our time on Podomatic is going to be coming to an end. You, at some point, probably April 1st, on your iTunes feed or Stitcher feed, will hear some sort of message from Mr. Stanway saying, you need to re-add our RSS feed to constantly get your subscribed episodes. So it'll be maybe a small transition, but you'll get used to it. It'll be fine, and then you'll be good to go. Patreon backers don't have to worry about any kind of transition issues or headaches like that. So for myself, Rob McCallum, thank you. For the video game rockstar, Jay Bartlett, his quote of the week, the one thing you've been waiting to hear every episode. He's about to say it right now. Here it comes. Get ready. Here it is. Jay.
Tetsu Leach, good to see you.
Do you still really call him Han Solo now instead of Han?
Han Solo. I do. Remember on the phone today, I was like, I remember that part with Han Solo. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Never called him Han Solo in my life. It's funny.
And Glenn Stanway, producing and editing.
Thanks so much again, guys, for listening and for all of your incredible support. As always, love doing this for you guys, and we love the fact that you enjoy listening to us and our wicked Bizarre Rants.
Speaking of love, it's actually Valentine's Day when we record this. I just want to say I love you guys so much. I love you so much. It's so good. I love you.
Well, I do want to say happy Valentine's Day to my Valentine, Mike Sharon. So kisses.
Oh, it's so good.